Welcome to the Health Headliner podcast by Tudu Digital. Our content is informational only and not medical advice. Please consult your provider. Now, let's dive into today's headlines.
You know that moment when you're talking to someone or maybe trying to remember something super obvious and poof, your brain just seems to hit pause.
Yeah, complete silence upstairs.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Nothing there. It happens to, well, pretty much everyone, I think. And it's this experience, this kind of mind blanking that we're going to dig into today. It doesn't quite feel like just zoning out or mind wandering. It seems like something else.
It really is intriguing, isn't it? We usually think our minds are just constantly going, like a running stream of thoughts, feelings, sensations.
Right. Nonstop.
But what happens when that stream just seems to, well, dry up for a second? We're going to look at some really interesting insights today, mostly from a recent opinion piece in Trends in Cognitive Sciences.
Okay.
And that piece itself is based on a whole load of existing research. So it's giving us a good look at the current thinking on this.
Right, the cutting edge. And it's interesting because for a while, researchers looking at our brains at rest were mostly focused on mind wandering.
Yeah, where your thoughts just drift off.
Exactly. But the scientists behind this new work, they started thinking these moments of, like, total emptiness might be different. They noticed people describing these blanks often said they felt sleepier, more sluggish maybe.
Yeah, compared to when their minds were just jumping between topics. And figuring out that potential difference is, well, it's pretty important.
So how did they study it?
Well, a group of researchers got together, actually after a meeting in Amsterdam back in 2022, to collaborate on this.
Okay.
A key person here is Athena de Mertzi from the University of Liège. Her team basically did a deep dive into, I think it was 80 relevant research articles.
80, wow.
Yeah, including studies where people had actually reported thinking of nothing while, having their brain activity measured.
So pooling all that data, what did they find? How often does this even happen?
Well, one of the first things is that it varies a lot between different people.
Okay, that makes sense.
But on average, it seems like mind blanking happens somewhere between, say, 5% and maybe 20% of the time we're awake.
5 to 20%. That's actually quite a bit of our day.
It is. It really makes you think about, what that means for how we're processing things or just engaging with the world around us.
Totally. And what is the experience like? What falls under this mind-blanking umbrella?
Good question. The research pulled together some common descriptions, things like short lapses in attention, where you suddenly snap back and realize you missed what someone just said.
Been there.
Or those moments you can't grab a memory that feels like it should be right there.
Oh, the tip of the tongue thing, but maybe even blanker.
Kind of, yeah. And even the sudden absence of your inner voice, that sort of internal monologue many of us have.
Huh. So different parts of our mental machinery can just temporarily switch off.
Seems like it. And it looks like these blanks aren't totally random either.
Okay.
The researchers spotted certain times they're more likely, like towards the end of a really long, demanding task. Think finals week.
Right, when your brain feels fried.
Exactly. Or after you've had a very little sleep. Or even after intense physical exercise.
Okay, exhaustion seems to be a trigger.
It can be. But what's also interesting is that they also happen just during our normal day-to-day waking state, even when we're not particularly tired or stressed out.
It's a normal thing the brain does sometimes.
That's what it suggests, yeah, just part of its regular operation.
Interesting. You mentioned earlier it varies between people. Does it connect to any specific conditions?
It does. And this is important. Children with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, they report experiencing mind blanks more often.
Okay.
And get this, the feeling of one's mind going empty is actually listed in the official diagnostic manual, the DSM-5, as something associated with generalized anxiety disorder.
Wow, okay. So it's not just some harmless little glitch for everyone. It can be linked to clinical issues.
Precisely. It highlights that understanding this better could have real implications. The research also mentions its relevance after things like strokes, seizures, traumatic brain injuries, even a rare sleep disorder called Klein-Levin syndrome.
That's a really wide range of conditions.
It is, which suggests the mechanisms behind mind blanking might be pretty fundamental to how the brain works or, how it can malfunction sometimes.
So what is happening in the brain? You mentioned brain activity studies.
Right. So technologies like Functional magnetic resonance imaging, fMRI, and electroencephalography, EEG.
Looking at blood flow and electrical signals.
Exactly. They've given us some early clues. Studies looking at people just resting, not doing a specific task, have found particular patterns of activity in brain networks like the frontal, temporal, and visual areas that seem to appear right before someone reports their mind going blank.
Like a warning sign, a neurological lead-up.
Sort of, yeah. A kind of prelude.
Okay, so things change leading up to it. What about during the blank itself, especially after you've been concentrating hard?
Yeah, this is where it gets really fascinating. There are actual physiological changes. People's heart rates tend to drop, their pupils often get smaller, and their brain activity. It shows what scientists call lower signal complexity, which is a pattern you often see when consciousness is reduced, like in sleep or anesthesia.
So the brain is genuinely powering down in a way.
It seems like it's momentarily downshifting, yeah. And one really cool idea they talk about is local sleep episodes.
Local sleep, what does that mean?
Using EEG, they've seen disruptions in how the brain handles sensory input. And at the same time, they see these slow brain waves, kind of like sleep waves, popping up just in specific brain areas.
So parts of the brain might be briefly asleep even while you're awake.
That's the idea. Like a few circuits just dimming for a moment while the main system is still on. It really challenges that simple idea that you're either fully awake or fully asleep.
Wow, that's kind of mind-bending.
Isn't it? But it's not always about slowing down. Sometimes it seems the opposite can happen. They found that a surge of activity, particularly in the back parts of the cortex, the posterior regions leading to really fast processing, can paradoxically make your overall thinking slower and trigger a mind blank.
So too much activity can overload the system, like tripping a breaker.
That's a good analogy, yeah. Almost like it needs a quick reset.
Okay, this is complex. What about when people try to blank their minds, like in meditation?
Good question. They looked into that too. When people were instructed to actively empty their minds, researchers saw less activity in several key areas.
Which areas?
Places like the inferior frontal gyrus, Broca's area, big language centers, also the supplementary motor cortex, and the hippocampus, which is crucial for memory.
So trying to stop thinking involves quieting down the brain's language and memory hubs.
Seems that way. But the researchers think there might be a common element linking all these different kinds of blanks, the spontaneous ones, the ones linked to fatigue, maybe even the intentional ones.
And what's that common thread?
They propose it could be shifts in our level of arousal, how awake and alert we are.
Okay.
Their framework suggests that when our vigilance level fluctuates, maybe gets too low, or perhaps even too high, it can disrupt those core functions like attention, memory, language.
Leading to a mind blank.
Exactly. So both very low and very high arousal states might make mind blanks more likely.
That creates a really different picture. It's not just one thing called mind blanking.
Right. It's more like a family of related experiences, all rooted in our basic physiology and heavily influenced by how aroused, how switched on our system is at that moment.
So what are the big takeaways from thinking about it this way? What are the implications?
Well, first and maybe foremost, it really strengthens the idea that mind blanking is probably its own distinct mental state. It's not just a subtype of mind wandering. It seems to have unique features, unique brain patterns potentially.
Which could change how we map out our own conscious experience, right?
Absolutely. And remember how much it varies from person to person.
Yeah, that 5 to 20% range.
That points to potentially significant differences between us, not just in how it feels, our subjective experience, but maybe even in our underlying brain physiology and how it functions day to day.
Understanding those differences could be a big area for future research.
Definitely. And then there's the clinical connection we talked about.
Right. ADHD, anxiety, brain injury.
If we understand mind blanking better, maybe it could help with diagnosis or even treatment down the road. Recognizing it as a potential symptom could be really useful for doctors and therapists.
Something else that strikes me, the fact that we can report having no thoughts. We're awake, we can respond, but we say, my mind was empty. How do theories of consciousness explain that?
That is a fantastic point. It's a real challenge. How can we have enough awareness to notice and report the lack of content without any specific thoughts or sensations filling that awareness? Current theories need to grapple with that.
It adds a whole new layer.
It really does. And it makes you wonder about connections to other low-content states, too, like certain types of meditation where the goal might be no thought or pure awareness.
Or even sleep. People sometimes report white dreams or just Blackouts, nothingness.
Exactly.
Mm.
Are these related to mind blanking? It's tempting to draw parallels, but the researchers are cautious here.
How so?
While there might be similarities on the surface, the underlying brain stuff, the phenomenology of what it actually feels like are probably quite different across mind blanking, deep meditation, and sleep states.
Yeah.
We need a more nuanced view of all these different kinds of emptiness.
That makes sense. It's not all the same void.
Probably not, and we also have to be honest about the limits of the research right now.
Okay, what are the main challenges?
Well, a big one is just defining it. Different studies have used slightly different definitions of mind blanking.
So it's hard to compare apples to apples if everyone's definition is slightly different.
Exactly. It makes synthesizing the results tricky, and then there's just the challenge of measuring it.
How do you reliably catch something so fleeting and internal?
Right. There's no single perfect method. A lot of studies rely on self-reporting people pressing a button or saying when they think they had a blank.
But you might miss some, or not notice them until later.
Precisely. There's the issue of awareness, and also distinguishing between a blank mind you try to achieve, like in meditation, versus one that just happens spontaneously. The brain activity might look quite different.
And that raises another point. Could there be blanks that happen that we're not even aware of at all? Like zero awareness, so we can't report them.
That's a very real possibility. These unreported blanks are a big unknown. How often do they occur? What are they like? We just don't know yet.
It helps to hear directly from the researchers, too. What are their perspectives?
Yeah, Athena Demirci, who we mentioned earlier, she basically said their goal was to get a better handle on mind blanking by looking closely at studies where people actually used phrases like thinking of nothing.
Focusing on that specific report.
And another researcher, Jennifer Wint, she's made the point that experiencing a blank mind is just as real, just as direct a subjective experience as having a thought. It's not necessarily just the absence of thought, but an experience of absence.
That's an interesting way to put it.
And Antoine Lutz from Lyon, he hopes this work sparks more conversation about how mind blanking fits in with similar experiences, like those in meditation.
Comparing and contrasting those states.
Exactly. And finally, Thomas Engelin, the lead author on that Trends in Cognitive Sciences piece, he really stressed how important and timely this investigation is.
Why timely?
Because it pushes back against the simple idea that our minds are always filled with a constant stream of thought. It highlights those individual differences we talked about and reminds us that our conscious experience isn't uniform. It varies in richness and awareness from moment to moment.
So it adds complexity to our picture of the mind.
Definitely.
Okay, so for everyone listening, maybe the takeaway is to pay a bit more attention to your own mental habits.
Yeah, absolutely. Notice those moments when things go quiet internally. When do they happen for you after concentrating? When you're tired, relaxed? What does it actually feel like? Just observing it in yourself can be, well, pretty eye-opening.
And if you want to dive deeper into the science, that article is in Trends in Cognitive Sciences. We can put the DOI, the identifier, in the notes. Maybe it's a 10.10 sex, G6.2025.02.002.
Good idea.
So maybe a final thought to leave people with.
Okay.
If our minds can just spontaneously go offline like this, even briefly, what does that really tell us about consciousness? About the feeling of a continuous self? Could understanding these blanks, these moments of seeming absence, actually unlock new ideas about attention or memory or even just who we are?
That's the big question, isn't it? What secrets are hidden in the silence? It's definitely something to ponder.
Thanks for tuning in to the Health Headliner podcast by To Do Digital. Like and subscribe for more health news and breakthroughs. Stay healthy and informed. See you next time.